Welcome to Roots and Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is going to be our episode number 2 of Roots and Ruminants podcast. First off, we got to give a shout out. We got to give a shout out to everybody that listened to episode 1. Man, we had a lot of texts, emails, calls, a lot of great responses. And who would have thought that James Holtz had a lot of positive comments from his positivity. That was unbelievable. So, welcome back. Thanks for listening to episode 1. I'm Justin Frichte. Got my co-host and partner in crime, Jared Knock, along with. And we set the bar high with episode 1, but a little pre-chat here. I think we're going to set the bar even higher with episode 2. So we are extremely excited to shift gears here just a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about ranching side of things. Okay, we've got our guest, Luke Perman, from up by Lowery, South Dakota. And so, Luke, thanks for coming on. This is awesome. Excited to have you here. Let's just start from square one. Give us your background, introduction, the down low on you and Rock Hills Ranch in Lowery.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I don't know that I'm going to have a whole lot of more interesting stuff to say than what James did. Like, you pretty much just listen to that one before you listen to this, and then you'll know what I'm talking about. But I guess myself, I grew up a few miles from where I live right now. I guess go back a little bit. My folks graduated from SDSU in the 70s, moved back to the area that our family's been in agriculture, not necessarily just ranching, but farming as well since, the early 1900s, I guess. So I'm the 5th generation to kind of make a living in agriculture down in our Swan Creek Valley, I guess. So my folks kind of started on the place that, like, the main ranch that we run now in 76, made it through, the farm crisis of the 80s by the skin of their teeth, and kind of brought me along. I was indoctrinated from a pretty young age that this is what I was going to do with my life. There wasn't really a discussion of, so where do you want to go to college and what do you want to major in? It was like, you're going to go to South Dakota State and you're going to get a range science degree. Any questions? It was kind of my only deviation from that was to join the National Guard, and I did a tour in Iraq kind of in the middle of my college education, and probably learned as much through that as I did in the classroom, of course. But
for sure.
So then I came back to the ranch in 06. My wife Naomi and I got married in 07. She joined me, and then we've got 4 kids. We have 2 sets of twins. I got 6-year-olds and 10-year-olds. So
2 sets of twins.
2 sets.
That is awesome.
It is awesome. And
I have sheep. And anytime that we can lamb out 200%, we're very, very happy.
I try to keep the analogies with the livestock production and child rearing to the minimum. Yeah. Like, my wife kind of appreciates that.
Separation.
There are not really economies of scale when it comes to, like, having kids 2 at a time. Anyways, but they're great. So when I came back from college, then I just kind of slowly every year kind of work into a little more responsibility, a little more involvement with management of the ranch to the point we're at now. I'm pretty well, day-to-day and strategic stuff is kind of my thing to take care of. Dad helps with what he wants to when he wants to. He officially bought an old tractor to mow the ditches with.
This stage of life.
Yep. That just showed up last week, so which is great. I'm happy. It's good for him. So, anyways, that's kind of
it's a good place to be.
Yeah.
So tell us about the native rangeland that you have on your property. Have you done any restoration to that? Have you done any planting of that, or has it always been virgin native sod?
There's most of it is native sod. There's altogether there's probably about 300 acres, I'm going to guess, that was farmed at one time. Now, some of that was planted back to brome grass and alfalfa in the 70s. And those were, I don't know how anybody ever farmed that stuff because it was a lot of work, a lot of rocks, little fields. We've done a couple hundred acres in the last 15 years that was kind of marginal farm ground, and we just knew it'd be better if it was something perennials. So, yeah.
So growing up at this native range, and then obviously going to SDSU and having a range degree, maybe you were pushed into that range emphasis, but what sparked you into that, or what really got you excited to keep going down that path in life?
I think probably a couple of things. Probably one is actually the interest from people outside of agriculture in what that native rangeland represents, or what value they see in it. I mean, our thoughts as cattlemen is usually, well, it's just feed, and it's no different than silage or corn or hay, or it's something that the cows can eat. That's how we see it, and to see it from the context or through the lens of it's our water filtration system, it's our clean air, it's our wildlife habitat, not just for the wildlife that we want to hunt, but migratory birds and insects. There's all this stuff that, and not to mention the actual plant species that they can't handle being cultivated. They have to have a native ecosystem to live in. So I think that's one of the things that's really intrigued me as I looked at it. I think another reason that it interests me is probably actually my faith kind of plays into it too, and seeing what I see as the hand of God created this system that is amazingly intricate, and as humans we're always trying to hack it, and we're trying to figure out how to make it better. It's like, you know what, just see how it works, see how it's designed, and try to fit into that rather than trying to bring our own ideas and leverage stuff that there's always repercussions to that. So being really careful about, all right, what's our role here? How do we work within the system without throwing it out of whack? So those are a few things, but it's just a constantly evolving thing. I honestly would say I wasn't as excited about it when I came back from college as I am now. My passion for it has grown as time has gone on.
Oh, I see that too. I mean, just me personally, I never had an interest in pasture range production, until I started working for Millborn. And the more years you go through a season of grazing and watching and learning, the more you start to appreciate it. Yeah, and like you said, the more you start to realize how diverse this whole ecosystem is and how correct it is naturally made, right? And so, looking at it through your belief system as God created this right. Now, how do we just be stewards of this to make it work right? Well, utilizing what we need to and making a business out of it.
Right. And I think one of the things that the realization, or one of the ways that I realized that was, and admittedly, I have not read Lewis and Clark's journals, but I've heard people talk about.
I bet Jared has.
I read. It's been a long time ago, but I have. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you hear about the grass being as tall as the back of the horse or whatever, and where is that?
Where is that?
I mean, nobody has that right now. So what happened since then? Yep.
And I think it's so this is a great place to put a distinction between pastures and rangeland. Okay, so for many of our listeners here and to the east and to the south, there's a difference between a pasture and rangeland. We have both pastures and rangeland in our operation. Our pastures are predominantly cool season introduced grasses that were planted on farm ground after the 1930s, and our rangeland is either our restored rangeland that we planted to a 20 species mix just a few years ago, or virgin sod that's been there for a long time. So explain, kind of what your definition from a species diversity and kind of a makeup of what you like to see in healthy rangeland.
Well, despite the fact that, probably, well over 90% of the acres that we either own or rent or whatever are native rangeland, there's still an abundance of introduced species that have encroached into there. So that's a that's a deep question. What do I see as a healthy native rangeland? I guess species diversity is the first thing. If I see brome grass, which has its place, I'm not saying that there's not actually kind of an aside there. There's not a plant that I'm that just has absolutely zero value on our place. Everything has some value, whether it's as a foraging resource for animals or soil biology or whatever. Everything has a place. So, but on our native rangelands, I don't want to see a total dominance of one or
Of
two
any one
species.
thing.
Right.
Yes.
There's got to be multiple things, and I think forbs are probably the underappreciated part of that, and especially the ones that we don't see as livestock feed. So I want to see some of those. I don't want to see the cows eating everything. I want to see something that I want to see diversity. At bottom line, that's it.
And quite a bit of diversity. I hear a lot of people talk about, their, definition. Everybody's got something different. Of a healthy rangeland is 30 species in a single field or in a single 10-foot square or something like that. But it's probably at least a dozen. You know what I mean? If we get to a dozen species of grasses and forbs in a biome, that's at least a start, which is actually kind of hard to find because continuous season-long grazing as well as introduced species, even in our native rangeland, has taken a lot of that away, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges that we faced is, okay, what was supposed to be here? What was here when this area was settled, and what is our measuring stick? And so it's species composition. It's also like things like ground cover and insect and animal diversity as well. But like on our native native rangelands, I mean, there's 100+ species if we go and count all of them.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to see. If I only see half a dozen or even 10, I'm like, could be better.
One of the reasons at Roots and Ruminants we wanted to go through this entire spectrum and have a diverse audience of people that we talk to is that really when we're talking about the 5 principles of soil health, or we're talking about cover crops, we're all coming back to the core concept of like rangeland succession, right? Which is that over time species diversity comes into play and fills and meets needs that aren't met by a single species, right? So when we're talking about a cover crop, we're saying, we want a warm season, cool season grass, warm season, cool season broadleaf. We're looking for the same composition in rangeland too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So it's really, I feel like the apex of this self-sustaining system of circular flows of nutrients, circular flows of water cycles and everything is that highly diverse native rangeland. With heavy forb and flower inclusion.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the 5 principles of soil health. Like those are all first principles for healthy native rangeland as well. And there are so many equals on both sides, on the crop farming and on the native range. The two can learn so much from each other if we just look at it through the same lens. It's really cool.
Yep, it needs to.
Your focus on maintaining those native rangelands has led you to get more creative than just traditional cow-calf operation. And that's one of the things we want to make sure and focus on today is what are some of those other ways you've said, okay, if we said that continuous season-long grazing of cow-calf operations was one approach, the predominant approach to pastures and rangelands today, we have a different system. Tell us about how you've broadened out not only in the cattle sector, but maybe after that we'll get into some of those other areas too.
Sure. Well, I think trying to manage or play a role in that in the native rangeland ecosystem with only a cow-calf enterprise is like entering a fight with one hand behind your back because you can only do so much. And so we introduced, first I guess as it pertains to the cow-calf side of it, we've adjusted our calving dates to kind of match our forage resources a little better. And then so we started the 1st of May. I know that doesn't work for everybody. Works good for us and allows us to, change up our season of use in different places. And it's been helpful there. Even early season grazing, being able to go and Kentucky bluegrass is one of the introduced species that has kind of choked out some of the native stuff on some of that native rangeland. And we've been able to use the cows in March when they had to be in the yard because we were calving and have to check and all that. Well, now we can take them out in March to that bluegrass, and they'll just eat it down to nothing and actually open up that canopy so that the native grasses can come through. And you can see it in year 1, the difference, just by getting rid of, just managing that bluegrass differently, that the western and the green needle are able to come up through that, what used to be just choked out canopy. So that's one way we've been able to, we changed our cow-calf deal, but adding stockers. So we're about roughly a third of our stocking rate this year will be from yearling steers, and the possibility or the opportunities to manage differently with those is I'm still learning what all you can do with them, but it's really, really cool coming from all the cumbersomeness of moving pairs and, well, we can't go 4 miles tomorrow because we got little, week-old calves. You can't do it.
Sure.
But we got 500 steers. Shoot, we can go tomorrow morning at, we'd be done in an hour. It's just really fun to be able to do some neat things with those guys, and just the flexibility on stocking rate, being able to ship them early if we're dry.
Sure. Yeah.
That kind of thing.
More flexible.
Yeah.
So are those your home raised calves that you're holding back? Or
we hold back some of our home raised,
Okay.
And then we buy some as well.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Sure. Okay.
Yep.
So the calving side is still your main focus, right? That's your main.
That's what we spend the most
business.
work on.
Yeah.
If that's what you mean.
Time allocation.
Yeah.
Like every farmer with livestock. Yep. So you get the cattle, and they are a tool to increase productivity on your rangeland, but also they're still a profit center from your rangeland.
Mm-hmm.
When you first came,
I hope.
Yeah, right.
We
Yeah.
try to make them
Don't look
profit.
too close.
Yeah.
You might not like what
That's
you
just
find.
yeah. That term we can just
profit
be loose
with a
with the
lowercase
profit.
p. Yeah. So when you came back from college, was that your main focus? Was I'm going to run the cows, and I'm kind of excited about this rangeland. Was that just the only focus, or did you have other things that you're like, yeah, Lee, when I go back, I hope I can start to implement this and this and this? Or
Well, I think growing up on a ranch, you learn how to check cows, how to fix fence, how to do all the hands-on ranch stuff, and usually you don't get quite as much exposure to the business side of it. Now,
Yeah.
I had a checkbook in 5th grade, so my dad was pretty good about teaching me, like, okay, there's some actual costs involved with this whole thing. It's not just playing cowboy every day. So I did have that, but I don't think I ever really took great interest in the business side of it until ironic is my last semester of college, and it's like the capstone course. And Eric Mosel, if you're listening, like, I owe you, like, whatever success I have in ranching is probably in some level he gets some credit for, because we're taking this capstone course where you're supposed to bring together everything you learned in all your other classes. And I realized I don't really know what, like, gross margin is. And, like, I understand a break even, but I just the whole business side of it, I was like, whoa, I'm not really equipped to handle that side of ranching. I know how to do everything else, but the business, I'm lost on. So that was kind of one of the things that I, after college, was like, all right, this is what I'm going to try to spend more time learning. And I think that led me into just utilizing rangeland better and realizing, if you look at it, take a step back and think about the dollar value of the assets that we manage. The land is, like, it's not even close. That's the biggest asset that we manage. So if I can increase the production or the and long term, like, let's not get like, well, what's going to happen in 2021? No, like, long term, if I can increase the production or the value of that by 1%, well, that's way bigger than, I'm going to save 2% on my feed costs, or or my feed efficiencies. That stuff's all fine too, but let's look at the elephant in the room that doesn't get talked about.
Yep.
Your
highest valued asset, making sure it's still bringing you a return.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's what opened my eyes to, hey, there's more to this than just turning the cows out. And my parents were pretty early adopters of, like, grazing management, so it wasn't like it was a totally foreign concept to me. But I think putting the dollars and cents to it really is like, well, we got to pay attention to this. And then all the other things I talked about as far as the other values besides just grazing value, that it all kind of coalesce at the same time. And
Yeah, so I think that ranching could very easily be characterized as a money-losing proposition that happens to go hand in hand with the highly profitable activity of long-term land ownership.
I like it.
And because if you look at, and I've said this before, so from my great-grandfather passed away a couple years ago, 5-6 years ago. In his lifetime, he saw land appreciate from $7 an acre to $7,000 an acre in the same neighborhood, on the same section. Okay, so that's a 1,000-fold appreciation in asset. And so it almost nothing, the gross proceeds of all the crops on that land don't exceed that number. The gross proceeds, counting crop failures, not counting farm subsidies. So we're pricing more into the optimism of the future of the land than it ever. That's why it never works to buy land. That's why it never makes sense.
Right.
It never cash flows, and it never will.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, what you're saying is we want a primary activity for this enterprise is essentially land ownership, that we want to make sure that we retain our asset. Everything else is working around that primary goal.
But I would push back a little bit on the idea that we can't be profitable, because most of my grass is rented.
Yeah.
So if I can't cash flow, I'm kind of out of a job pretty quickly. So I think we have to look at ways like, okay, so how do I tighten the screws up here? How do I figure out how to make it cash flow? Now, purchasing land, that's a different story. I agree with you. Like, I can't cash flow it. I haven't yet figured out a way to cash flow a land purchase, at least at the prices that I haven't bought much land, so take that for what it's worth. But
it was a pretty tongue-in-cheek comment.
Yeah,
you know,
but it's extremely valid, because especially for places that own all their own property, how can you not be making money? It's, I don't know. You have to figure out what you're doing or how to push it. You know, how to do better.
It is, and it's difficult to like draw that line of or when the right proper role is. But I think, like I said, what you just said there was recognizing that hey, this keeping this land together in its most pristine form is the most important thing I do. Mm-hmm. Everything else has to play into that primary goal first.
Yes. Yep. Agree. 100%.
So you're doing some more things, right? So we got stocker operation.
Just pause 1 second. I want to add one more thing to that. Okay, so this is a bit more philosophical of how to best make money off of those rented acres, but still make sure that those acres are productive 15 years from now. Like, or you're saying, my home acres, those are the ones I'm going to take care of best. Those rented acres, that's where I'm going to make money. Let's graze those with twice the stocking rate of the home acres. Like, how do you play that?
Is this supposed to be a 1 hour podcast?
Well,
maybe we don't go there.
I'll let Luke answer. He's our guest. But I would say built into that, which is a great question, because built into that is expressing the false expression of rest is best for grass, right? Because that's how we normally look at it, is that by resting that grass more, it'd be better. And then, Luke, you're going to tell us how you properly rest grass and properly utilize it, right?
Yes. Okay. I guess as far as the profitability side of it, it's not just the production of pounds of forage any more than cow-calf production is simply pounds of calf produced. Like, there's more to it than just the production side of it. So what value are we getting out of each pound? So if I can sell my calves for an extra 10 cents a pound, that's more profitable. If I can sell my grass to my cows and it's worth more per pound, that's how I think that's how you do it. And it's not okay. So that's just the grass, but what about everything else? What about the butterflies that are flying around? They have no value to me as a cowman, but they do to my cousins that live in the city that want to come out and see nature or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and not that everybody has to have like a tourism enterprise, but just think about it. Think about what other layers of value are there besides just feed for cows, you know?
Right. Love it.
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
Did you want me to go to your question about the...
Well, no, I think that's the segue, right? So rather than just looking at your cow-calf enterprise, and I have to rent this ground for $60 an acre, I need X amount of cow-calf grazing days per acre to make this work, you've said, okay, I can live with X amount of cow-calf grazing days per acre, but in order to make that work, I'm going to rest a little bit longer, I'm going to gain some habitat, and I'm going to incorporate a few other enterprises that are going to return X amount of dollars per acre and help pay for that rent.
Yeah.
And as you're referencing your frame to, literally butterfly pollinator habitat, extremely large focus for a lot of people, a lot of corporations, a lot of groups, a lot of nonprofits, individuals. It is interesting, and we'll see this flesh out in multiple ways in the next few years, but I'm keenly interested in figuring out how these societal benefits get monetized in the near future. There's going to be some good, there's going to be some bad, there's going to be some strange that all come out of that. But watching it very closely to see how can we provide these societal benefits that have offer benefit to people far outside the property boundaries that we have, that people are vested in.
Well, it sounds like Luke's already doing it.
Well,
Right? So
attempting.
Okay.
It's more ideas than an actual application of that stuff. But so just to go off on a tangent that will probably make some people's heads explode. What you're saying about how do we capture the value that we're providing society besides a safe, reliable food source, right? Mm-hmm. What if that safe, reliable food source, suddenly we have competition in that is it cheaper and tastes better? I'm talking about fake meat.
Right.
And nobody wants to hear this, but I think you're kind of got your head in the sand if you think that they're not going to get better at what they're doing.
Oh, yeah, they are.
They have, and this could be another hour. I can tell you everything I've thought about with that, but seriously, what happens when fake meat tastes better and is cheaper than real beef?
Then basically the South turns into sugarcane production, and the North turns into probably a more intensified corn-soybean rotation to produce basic glucose, sucrose, sugars, which feed genetically modified yeast through precision fermentation, which make the fatty acids and amino acid profiles that make up the flesh of animals today, right? Yeah. And that's a real future.
Well, and I'm not arguing that that's what should happen. I'm saying that could happen.
Like I said, that is in the cards, right? Mm-hmm. That is precision fermentation, which is how insulin is already made, mostly globally. And actually, we're already eating this stuff. So if you've ever tried the Impossible Burger, you've already eaten the product of precision fermentation, a genetically modified yeast that produces as its byproduct heme iron, which is why Impossible Burger Beyond, which is different than Beyond Burger, actually has some highly digestible iron in it. So we can't even make that. We're the only source of highly digestible iron claim like we normally do in the beef industry. So there's a real concern out there that, they can be able to formulate diets for humans the way that we're formulating diets for animals.
So then that brings me back to what am I going to do? Because of the 14,000 acres that I, have a management role on, there's only about 1,500 that we can grow corn or soybeans on. Mm-hmm. So now what? So I think understanding how my management affects the butterflies and the water and all this, that's so critical because that might be the management skill that I have that I can bring value to the marketplace, whereas raising cattle might not even be. I know I'm probably making some people uncomfortable by saying that, but I think you got to think about it.
Well, we all should feel uncomfortable about that. And it's not my idea. It's not yours, Luke.
Maybe? No, it's not my idea.
But it's coming up, and it's going to face us. So it doesn't matter how efficient we can make animals from a feeding sector side of things if we're not a net benefit, right? Mm-hmm. Because we'll never beat the efficiencies of yeast when it comes to substrate production, right? Not with the chicken, not even with the fish. Okay, so if you want to talk about feed efficiency, the yeast wins. It's too simple. It's not going to get beat. So we don't beat it based on efficiency. We beat it based on being a net positive. Yep. So if we're not a net positive in the ag sector, we're not going to win the efficiency sustainability race. Is that fair?
Exactly. That's you said it way more articulate. I can't even say the word articulate. You say it way better than I did, but I agree. Exactly.
So tell us about your product in the future, 10, 15, 25 years from now. You're still going to have that native rangeland. You have no choice. You can't produce corn on that to produce sucrose to make genetically modified yeast, essentially crap out a substance that they're going to make and call meat, right? Yep. So how are you going to position your product in a retail space? And what are you going to tell people about what you're providing that fake meat's not?
I don't know that I've quite got to that point of what that product's going to be. I can tell you I've started to look at like our genetics from a standpoint of, okay, in 10 years, if grass-fed beef is the craft beer of, production, and that's where there's actually going to be profit left because we can, so that people are buying it based on how it was raised rather than the quality of the product. Right. Not that that's the scenario with craft beer, I guess, but
there's a story behind it.
There's a story behind it, exactly. So what's the story? Yeah. And efficiency isn't going to sell it.
Right.
No.
Price isn't going to sell it. Yeah. The production methods and the externalities are. And so as I choose genetics, if most kind of mainstream guys looked at my genetics, they would just probably fall over out of shock.
Why?
Because I'm just looking at different things. Like I'm not selecting based on, a lot of EPDs and terminal production stuff. It's performance on grass, longevity,
right,
like that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And
lower maintenance.
All the things that they say that they in the front of the catalog. I'm really gonna offend a lot of people here.
No, it's okay.
There's a lot of things in the front of the catalog that say, well, these are all maternally oriented, and then in the same breath, they're top of the line carcass and performance. And again, going back to this nature model, show me in nature how that, where you have animals that are fast growing and have a lot of meat and all this stuff, and yet longevity is good, and these are competing ideas that you can't. I don't know.
It just makes sense.
You can't replicate it. I should say you can have individuals do that, but replicating that with consistency is really hard.
Most of the improvements that we made were specifically to fit a management system, right? And so, along the same indexes would probably not work for what you want to do. That someone else that is chasing down a wholly conventional system, right? Yep. Or at least, and you're not chasing that today, but you want the flexibility to cross over when you want, right? You want a cow that could go both ways. So if she gets bred Wagyu or Charolais or Piedmontese, you've got a highly, defined output system that can go into a feed yard for whatever purpose. But if you want to flip the switch and keep your own bulls back and then all of a sudden go, I'm full on grass fed now. Yeah. That makes sense. I suggest that maybe you could actually select backwards on some of the EPDs. So you could take something like back fat, subcutaneous fat, which generally would lead you to easier fleshing type animals, which is normally you want less of, and actually select off the other end of the spectrum and go reverse in some areas.
Right. Yeah.
To select.
Yeah. It's kind of, and it's hard that mental shift of going from how we'd always pick bulls until it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago that I was like, we're gonna try something different here. Man, that is, you got to close your eyes almost. Because things don't look the same as they did before. Sure. But open them back up about 3 years later, and you'll be happy with what you see. Like for what my goals are, I look at these younger cows that are coming into our herd now, and I like that. I like what I see there. The pain of the transition was kind of hard, but going back to what you were saying about being able to shift gears for different markets, that's what we're trying to do too. And let me take a step back too. I'm not saying that people shouldn't raise the type of cattle that I went away from, because it all depends on your model. And so I'm not trying to discourage people from doing that.
Well, like you said, the future is craft beer and meat production, right? Yeah. That's, if you want a place and you want a high-end market and a premium, you got to be a little bit different. Yeah. One of the beautiful things about beef production is that we still have variety. And when people ask me, well, what's the way of the future? Is this Piedmontese deal? Is it Wagyu? Is it certified Angus beef, certified Hereford beef? It's like all the above, so that someone with enough disposable income can go have a steak 7 nights a week and have a different story and a different eating experience every single time, because they can't do it with pork and chicken today. Right. So we need to keep that diversity and expound on it. So I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. What's been really interesting is we had the same guy buy our steers off of grass last couple of years, and he's really happy with them. They go to Iowa to feedlot, and what is kind of funny to me is I think if he saw some of the bulls that sired those steers, he'd be like, "What are you doing?" You know what I mean? So, but the management system fit the cattle. So, no, they're not going to go to kill at 14 months or 13 months of age. The calf feds are not going to work with my genetic base. Run them on grass for the summer and kill them later. Then, it works.
Take more frame and push.
Yeah. So it's been such an interesting journey on the genetic side of things, but I'm not there yet by any means. But
so other than the genetics that help tell your story of how you're raising beef for that consumer, what other things will help tell that story?
Can we have the intermission music so I can think about that? What other things will help tell the story? The environment that they grew up in is, and we're already seeing that. I look at country natural beef. Most people in this part of the country aren't aware of them, but they've been around for like 20 or 25 years, and they're more on the West Coast. Okay. But it's a producer-owned co-op, and they have guidelines that you have to follow for, health and production stuff, but it's like an all natural, hormone free, antibiotic free program that's been very successful. They actually have tried to expand out to this part of the world, but that's another story. But I think as we get better at telling I'm not even going to say telling the story, because it's not a story, it's reality of how important these native rangelands are.
Yeah.
You have organizations like the World Wildlife Federation, which love them or hate them, they're saying, hey, these rangelands in north central, in North America are in an endangered ecosystem, and we need to try to figure out how to preserve them. Okay, they're saying we want to keep we want this thing to be intact, and so if I, as a rancher, can mimic nature and I can convince them, which we can, that I'm fitting in this system and I am producing meat. Those are the people that will help us to stay in business and sell our product.
I think there's more allies in our space now than we could even suppose and suspect to have. So if you listen to our podcast, you may have heard of a program called Joe Rogan. He does a thing podcast.
You remind me of him a lot.
Oh, thanks. But so he does one. If you haven't heard of that.
Did Matthew McConaughey, did he call back from episode 1? No. Maybe Joe will.
Shoot. Yeah,
we'll try for Joe.
But he, all the time he has engaging guests that talk about this system a lot and say, okay, well, there's this in between, this extractive agriculture in the between that we don't like, but we really like grass-fed beef and free-range elk and that kind of stuff, and we also like the fresh greens product over here. It's like we're already getting lumped into very strange, categories and ones that we're probably not familiar with. But it is the best story that we have to show. I think that yes, there's a danger to the grasslands in the Northern Plains. I'd also say that what has happened in the Northern Plains especially is the largest privately done, non-subsidized habitat preservation that you could imagine in the world. And one of the reasons they talk about, that they could see that it needs to be preserved is because it's largely still there. No one goes to Illinois and says, we got to save the Illinois forest, because they're gone. It's all cornfields, right? There's not even a remnant to preserve to get excited about. The reason that you can get excited about the grasslands in the Northern Plains, there's just so much of it there that you can see the potential of what it was to kind of bring it back from a species diversity standpoint. So I think it's a great story that we have to tell. It has, to this point, and still does, fit into the beef complex, right? We're not raising an appreciable amount of beef cows in barns yet. Right. We're not doing that part of it yet. So we're still a part of that story. We could increase our part of that story, and then we have some examples where the entire system resides on that kind of land. Mm-hmm. So it's a spectrum, and I think people need to understand it's not all or nothing. Almost every beef animal spends some time on, a perennial grass, which is a very positive thing from a land use standpoint. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that is something that needs to be talked about more. Mm-hmm. One of the issues I take with some of the industry efforts to kind of counter the animal rights people is they're using the same language. Mm-hmm. We produce less manure for the same pound of beef, and we use less water. It's stop talking in those linear terms. Yep. Since when is manure a bad thing? It's only bad when it's all in one place and it's polluting a river. It's actually fertilizer that we've known about for thousands of years. Yep. And so change the vocabulary.
And that's the problem. And I'm not advocating for grass-fed beef. I don't do it myself yet, right? And I thought about it and what it would look like, but don't do it. So I'm not saying that I'm here as an advocate for them, because I can't, because I don't do it yet. But if a cow is a net benefit to the environment, then the more cows, the better. And the more time they're on grass, the better. So we can come up with models and say that, grain-finished beef is more efficient than grass-fed beef, but both of those examples are the presumption that the cows are a net bad, okay?
Right.
And the reason one's less bad than the other is because it's alive for less amount of time and finishes faster, okay? Yeah. So it's back to that efficiency race. We can say this is more efficient, but if you can't be a net positive, you don't have a future as a story, as a model. But I love the term linear versus circular systems, and I think that's so. Frank Miltloner was a guy that I really appreciate for his message about livestock's real impact on greenhouse gases. I encourage everyone to look up Dr. Miltloner's work. Makes a comment about how you can't be both vegan and organic, right? Because you can't. There's no fertilizer source for you, or it's a slash and burn, let it go back to fallow type of agriculture. You can't be both vegan and organic. You can pick. You can be one or the other. But if you take away the tools of basically mined and commercial and fossil fuel-based fertilizer, you only have livestock manure as a resource to fertilize your ground. Which is exactly where you're talking. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing. Circular systems, circular nutrient flows are what we want to advocate for. I'm going to stop talking. Sorry.
Well, no, I love it.
So I'm going to kind of go on a tangent there. You'd asked me, like, I don't know, like 20 minutes ago about, like, the rest thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
And when to come back and graze it. So we're pretty good at, like, mixing a TMR for cattle. Like, we have that figured out down to the ounce, what needs to go in there. And we feed them every day. I don't know anybody that takes their TMR wagon and feeds once a month.
Right.
Just puts a big pile of feed out there and or that doesn't mix it.
Yep.
We're just going to put a pile of hay there, and we're going to put a pile of corn there, and the pile of silage over there, and we'll come back in a month and check on them. Okay, so now apply that thinking to rangeland. We have a TMR out there. It's a diverse native rangeland. Okay, so now how do I get the most value out of it? It's not just turn them out there and let them eat all the big blue stem first, and then they'll eat all the whatever, alfalfa or whatever, and then the last thing they'll eat is last year's prairie sandreed, and then we'll wonder why it doesn't work. No, if we apply the same type of management approach and just those first principles that led us to the how we manage cattle in a yard, if we apply some of those principles to rangeland, I think some of those profit things are going to kind of take care of themselves in some sense, and we will be able to get more value out of that pound of forage, right? So, an example, it kind of along those lines. First few years I did cover crops. I grazed them with dry cows that, like, they were opens that we were going to try to rebreed for a fall program.
Sure.
And they got fat as ticks.
Bet.
And I saw that and I was like, wow, that really worked. And I got almost no money out of that. I mean, the cows got fat and I got a couple more bread, but, like, the revenue off of that cover crop was less than what it could have been with a different enterprise using it. Okay, so applying the same thing to the rangeland, if there's only one enterprise that I'm willing to use and only one management system that I'm willing to apply on that rangeland, I am not going to get the most value out of that acre. And I might even be doing long-term damage to it, like through a continuous grazing kind of a thing. So the rest part of it, I mean, you can find a lot of resources on how long to rest grass, and that's kind of, you got to have your eyes open when you're managing. But if that plant can, recover back to where it was before you turn them out, that's kind of, for me, that's sort of the rule of thumb. I don't want to come back until it's fully recovered from where it was before I showed up.
Yep.
Or if it's, we'll just leave it at that for a rule
that's a
of thumb.
great analogy to the TMR. Yep. Because we spent a lot of time in school, we all did, right, learning how to do a TMR. And then never once, that I remember, doing a grass mix or including species diversity into a square foot of rangeland and saying that's your TMR.
Right.
Graze it for the day and then move it. Yeah. We
And
learned a lot about rotation and stuff, but thinking that process.
Yeah.
Nutrition.
Well, and then looking at it from setting it up for the next graze. So some of like the pastures that we graze early in the season, like say May and June, depending on how severe I graze them, I'll try to I can come back later on. Well, if I can harvest some of that grass early, it actually helps later on because I don't have so much lignin and everything built up in that plant. It's a little bit less mature, but it still will fully it's still recovered to a point where I'm not damaging it, as long as I'm not just mowing it off down to nothing. So there's some ways to set up the quality of that later on. But then the other side of it is, if I can go from, say, 27 or 20, and like in my area, so if it's once through in a normal year, I'll say I can do 28 to 30 animal days per acre. And if I can come through twice, I might be able to get 45 to 50 if I really mind my P's and Q's. And if I incorporate a more shorter duration and even more rest time, I might be able to get 60. So if you're talking 2 to maybe 3 times as much, and this isn't like Luke Perman, just making stuff up.
Right. No, this
magic wave of wand. This is like pretty. It's some of it's just harvest efficiency. How much is getting in their belly versus how much are they stepping on and laying on and not eating. It's the math works out. Like, it's pretty phenomenal if you learn the management system.
So you touched on capitalizing your best enterprise for that rangeland, right? And you kind of referenced cover crops, let's not put open cows on there. Let's probably put some stockers on there, or at least some calves or replacement heifers to gain some flesh going into winter. How have you done that with rangeland other than stockers?
Sheep.
Okay.
They're not our sheep
Uh-huh.
yet. I could see, with in the next 10 years when I have kids that can help a little more.
There you go.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, so they're a phenomenal tool for getting value out of stuff that I'd have to work pretty hard to get the cows to eat.
Okay.
And the two most glaring examples are leafy spurge, which not only don't the cows eat, but it's obviously a noxious weed that I'd have to spend a lot of money on chemical control, and this way I can really cut the chemical costs plus eliminate the seed. It's an absolute no-brainer. And then western snowberry is another one that we have a lot of, and the cows will eat it at certain times of the year, but the sheep can go in, and it's a phenomenal feed resource in my context. Now it might be other places, it might be goldenrod or who knows, whatever your context is, and sheep might not be the thing. Maybe it needs to be goats or whatever. I don't know. But yeah.
So you brought in sheep. You see some efficiencies for weed control. How has that negatively impacted your grazing days for your cow-calf or stocker operation?
It hasn't. No. You could argue that they're taking a few acres away from the cows, but you look at it from a dollars and cents standpoint, and it definitely, this system is better than just cow-calf.
So you're bringing in the sheep, and you're getting paid to bring them in, and they're your weed control, and you're not decreasing grazing efficiencies.
And I don't have to do anything with them because there's herders that are with them. So labor, if I'd add enough cows or yearlings to make up for those sheep, it's about roughly the equivalent of 200 cows. Okay, so it's a fair amount more work to add another 200 head of cows. So
Yep.
I'm starting to think maybe I shouldn't tell everybody about the sheep deal because
You can tell them. They won't do it anyway.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
You're right.
There's a mentor of ours that told us that you can tell people all you want how to do something right. They're not going to listen to you anyway. Don't worry. But I think it's been known for years, right? The conventional old school wisdom is that, right? That the sheep make money when the cattle doesn't, or the sheep pay off the cattle ranch. We've heard that time and time again from guys.
Well, enterprise stacking is something that we kind of forgot, and I'm not sure when we forgot it, but my grandma talks about when her and my grandpa first got married. You had the fat cattle at the bunk, and then their elimination was cleaned up by the pigs, and then the ducks came behind the pigs and cleaned that up, and then you see Joel Salatin or Greg Judy doing the same kind of stuff, and we're like, oh wow, it's so revolutionary. It's like, no, actually that's how it was for a long time.
I don't want to be too hard on our old alma mater here, but I don't think our college experience necessarily taught us that diversification was the way of the future.
You mean they taught us specialization?
Yes.
Oh,
remember that?
I think that, but that's not just university teaching.
No,
that's
wasn't.
our culture, our society. Yeah. Every industry is specialized. Right. Every business is specialized. So if we go home to be farmers or ranchers, you do that one thing and you do it great, right? Doesn't always maybe
and that's
make the most efficiencies.
I think that's a good concept. Like, we're just going to do this one thing where you're really good at it.
Yeah,
I think that's great if you have a factory because you can design the whole system around this one output. But that does not work when you're working with with nature. That's just not how it is.
And even that's assuming that the factory that you're at is able to produce a product which is stable and doesn't change in its form over time.
Oh,
right?
That's so true.
That's assuming that the product you're making is going to be a staple forever and never change.
Yep.
Which is also a fallacy.
And you have no waste that could have no value.
Right.
Or, you have no labor that has no downtime. All those things that,
I'm not sure that sort of specialization is really ever good, right? It's silo type thinking. And as much as we want to get away from it, I don't think we are getting farther away from it. I think we're getting ideologically more in that sphere. Scientifically, like we're compartmentalizing into this is the perfect way to do this in a vacuum by itself. I think there's great mobilization of things outside of pure sciences, like we talked about, practices that are getting back to the way things kind of used to be, but with modern application and honestly modern markets and potential premiums. So,
I think that's where the opportunity is for the next generation to come back into agriculture. I mean, I see far more places for, college graduates, whatever, coming back, or not necessarily college graduates, young people that are done with their formal schooling that want to get into agriculture. There's more opportunities, I think, with some of those stacked enterprises because they take a person there. It's not something that can be automated, or there's no auto steer for, doing some of the stuff that we're doing within native systems. And so, I think it may not be the way of the future on the macro level, but when we can't make decisions for our own businesses based on what the macro level, what resources do we have, what opportunities are there on our place, not on the industry level.
And if you stop assuming that everything is going to happen on a macro level, it gets easier to imagine the future. There was a book 20 years ago it came out. I remember reading it when I was in college called Micro Trends, which talked about how anytime 1 million people consume a product or become a fan of something, you have a micro trend. So stop looking for it used to be when we all consumed the same media, when we all consumed the same pop culture, we had these macro trends of where things moved. Now that everything is fragmented, just be comfortable with the fact that there is nothing but micro trends, okay? Everybody goes their own direction.
And lots of viable micro trends.
Right. Yeah, not only, it used to be if you had chickens in your hog lot, like you mentioned, cleaning up the corn out of the hog crap, that was just what you did to survive because you couldn't afford shoes. Now, not only can you do it, you can get a premium for the eggs, and you can sell flipping T-shirts because you did it.
Yes.
And you get free intern labor to help with it.
Yeah. Yes. That's the one last thing I would maybe have you talk about, Luke, if you can, about your internship or your apprenticeship program. What kind of interest do you get from that? Where do your apprenticeships interest come from?
Well, that's been kind of an interesting journey, I guess. Our first one was in 2013, and she came from Wisconsin.
Okay.
And we actually only had one from South Dakota. All of them have been, they had one from Utah, but everybody else is from East and South, which I guess that's where most of the people are, so it kind of makes sense. But the interest has been unbelievable. So that after the first year, we only had like 3 applicants because we were really late getting something put together. And so then we have a website for a ranch, so I went ahead and made a page on there. And I didn't know how you get on the first page of Google search results, but I did.
Okay.
For ranch internships, we were like the top one,
Nice.
which I've been told that's what you pay. You pay a lot of money for that, and I'm waiting for the check still.
Courtney's nodding yes. Yes.
So I don't know if we're
Usually
still
not free.
Yeah, I don't think we're still on the first page, but we had I think the most I had was 170 applications.
Wow.
And that was just advertising through our website. I sent out a few flyers to some universities with range programs, but it's been interesting because looking through the applications, there are just tons and tons of people that they showed a goat in FFA, or their uncle used to have a farm, and I mean, just a lot of, I'm seeing that one generation removed from agriculture, but they have this real interest in it without really knowing what the production side of it actually looks like, because it's more of a hobby thing in a lot of cases. But the interest is definitely there. As far as I have learned probably as much as they have, as far as managing people and stuff, and I've realized that I have a long ways to go in that side of it. So.
Whole new skill set.
Oh, man, yeah. So it's been interesting. Now we have transitioned into an apprenticeship. And by the way, they're not free interns. I do pay them.
Okay.
Since I had mentioned free interns. Some places don't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel right about that.
Yeah.
It's stress tests your way of doing things. You don't realize how complicated your operation is until you have to explain it to somebody that's never turned on a water tank or just some stuff like that. It's systems are really important if you're gonna do that. And it's not for the faint of heart. Like, it's not just, hey, there's young people that want to come and work hard. Yeah, they might, but there's all these things that you don't even know that you know about everything that
Now
they
you
probably
have to
have never
verbally
experienced.
communicate to somebody.
Yes.
Institutional knowledge that you take for granted.
Yep.
Yep.
They might be able to mix a ration, but they might not know the right way to splice high tensile wire, or even what tools to take with them to do it. So that there's just you have to be a patient person to do that. So
yeah, sure. Awesome. So what did we? Is there anything that we missed that you're like, you know what? I wish we would have touched on this or that, or that. Some great pieces in there. Man.
I don't know. I guess that. We did talk about it. Just the idea of getting more value out of our grass.
Yeah.
Or, getting more dollars for each pound of production or whatever.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So one of the things I've thought about a lot is, have you ever seen a cost share program for a bale processor?
No.
I haven't.
Nope.
How about for like bale feeders? Any kind of feeding equipment that increases our efficiency of the feed. Ever seen any? I haven't.
I haven't.
Okay. But somehow you go to town and they're just everywhere. Everyone's got a bale processor. Everyone's got all this stuff to make their feeding system more efficient.
Yeah. Okay.
But the government wants to give us half of the cost to install water and fence.
Sure.
And we're talking about orders of magnitude more efficiency in our grazing operations. And we have to get paid to do that. There's something about that just, it doesn't quite compute in my brain why it has to be that way. And if we're not taking advantage of that stuff, here's my other, my next chance I'll offend somebody. If we're going to hold up the banner of sustainability and we're the true environmentalists, we got to get this thing figured out, because if we're not doing these things, it's right there in front of us, and the taxpayer is willing to pay for it. Mm-hmm. We got to do it. It's not just good for our bottom line. It absolutely is. I have no doubt about that. But it's what the customer actually has value or places value on. So we got to do it.
I'd agree. I think that's a burden that I've thought through myself and said, this is our generation, and literally our generation. I think about people of our age or a little bit older, a little bit younger, are going to have to carry the torch here and fight this fight for the next 2-3 decades, because after that it's going to be decided, right? The technology is close enough at hand to replace a lot of the systems that we know and take for granted. And like I said, if we don't do it right, it's not just, it's everything I know, it's my entire network, the thing I'm passionate about, and almost all of my assets and my extended family's assets wrapped up in this.
Yep.
It's really important we do it right.
Yeah. Hope I didn't scare anybody by all this doom and gloom. It could.
No, it's not.
I think it's like I said. I think it'll help us improve our bottom line in the short term and in the long term. I think it's just,
and it's motivation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's taking this opportunity, realizing that this is a very opportunistic time to do these things right on our operation. Make sure that we are correctly telling what we're doing, because this is what the consumer wants. This is what our society, our government wants from us. Let's make sure we're doing it right.
Well, I think deep down it's what we want from ourselves.
We totally do. I mean, we started talking about this podcast about, the creation of God's ecosystem in our rangeland.
Right.
And we see that, we realize it. That is what we want.
Yeah. So we can't get any heavier and deeper than that. So we probably better finish up. We've been getting the wrap it up sign for about 15 minutes straight.
This has been fun. This is good.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Appreciate it, Luke.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolute joy to have you here. Appreciate your comments, your outlook on life in agriculture.
Yeah.
Luke, thank you much. And if you want to be applicant number 171 next year for the Rock Hills Ranch internship, make sure and visit the website.
Yeah. All right. That's it for Roots and Ruminants podcast. We really appreciate you listening, and make sure you stay tuned for episode 3 coming up.